Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another particular interesting video. And today I figured we would talk about the meeting between Zelensky and Trump. Now, I figured that since we're on a political route already in this YouTube channel, I figured why not I continue this course a little bit. And also I think it's important and very relevant for us Europeans in particular, also for Swedes and for me and for all the other people who are in Europe. Because Ukraine is obviously in Europe and there's a war going on our continent, and there are a few things I would like to talk about with regards to the meeting or what happened between Trump and Zelensky on Friday. And for those of you who haven't watched it, I highly suggest you do watch it a little bit, or maybe watch some snippets of it or read some articles, because I think normally I don't encourage people to get in, extremely political or, politicize things, but I think this was something worth watching or reading for sure. So a little bit of context. Let me start off by saying that in the past couple of years, Ukraine has been kind of dependent, or not only dependent on the US, but quite dependent on the US for military equipment, resources, money, funds, and so on and so forth under the Biden administration. And now that we have a new president, Donald Trump, things have been a little bit different. Things have been shaken up a little bit, let's say. And the question then became, well, what's going to happen next when Trump was inaugurated, essentially? And that caused a lot of uncertainty among a lot of Ukrainians and just for Europe in general, because also Europe was under impression that Trump is going to kind of back out of Europe as well, that US is not going to be any longer the shield and the protector of Europe, which in my opinion kind of correct in some ways, because it is high time that Europe should buckle up and gear up for their own safety and protection, because how long are we going to be dependent and relying on US and other countries for our safety and support? Like, we should actually be self-sufficient to begin with. I don't think that we should be entirely dependent on some country or some organization, so to speak. Yeah, NATO is okay, but that's a different story. I'm not going to go into the NATO aspect right now. I mean, one aspect I could just briefly ask for you is why did we need NATO after the collapse of the Soviet Union? What was the issue with that? Why did we continue? Well, yeah, then the argument is that, well, Russia is, this and that. Yeah, okay, but I'm not going to get too deep into that. What I'm going to get into is the meeting between Trump and Zelensky, and why is it such a turning point, in my opinion. So basically what happened was that Zelensky came to the White House, was invited, and they sat down. They had an open session, so to speak, an open seance. Trump decided to let the cameras roll, which in my opinion is pretty good. I respect the fact that things should be transparent and things should be open to the public, and there should be open sources so that people can see and understand what is going on, essentially. So that's one thing. The other thing was then the moment things started to get heated in terms of why Zelensky is not thankful enough. And of course, J.D. Vance had to interject or kind of intervene and start saying, well, when did you say thank you today? When did you ever express your gratitude? And then Trump, of course, started to hit on that point a little bit more, further and further. Zelensky tried to explain that no, I've been very grateful for that. I've been thanking everyone. I've been thanking our supporters, and so on and so forth.
He broke this ceasefire. He killed our people, and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Count once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
And it just became very extremely heated. There was a heated exchange between those three guys, and based on the sources, Zelensky was kicked out of the White House shortly after, when they were actually supposed to sign the mineral deal and they were supposed to have lunch together, and that didn't happen because Zelensky was kicked out earlier and he left the White House. And so what happened was the lunch was that the White House staff ate the lunch and the mineral deal wasn't signed, and everything was prepared, pen and paper was all there. There was a table and all that, so they had to clean that up, essentially. So that didn't happen. So first of all, there were a few remarks that I personally don't agree with Donald Trump, for example. First thing, the fact that Zelensky doesn't want peace. I don't really understand this point, and I've heard this point or this remark from many supporters from the Russian side, from basically people who oppose Ukraine in that sense. Why do you say that Ukraine doesn't want peace? It's kind of like, let's just say, for example, Poland gets invaded by Germany, and then we blame Poland for saying, you don't want peace. Why don't you make peace with Germany already, while Germany is pillaging and raping and burning down your villages and cities? It's kind of like, what? Really? And then there was another remark saying that somehow it's Ukraine's fault for starting the war. I mean, look, here's the thing. War is not black and white. I understand that. War is not just, one side just decided on a random Monday morning to attack a country. No, wars arise from the fact that there are two political parties, or there are two parties, let's say, two countries that have some long-term disagreement politically, and war is essentially based on Karl von Clausewitz. War is just a continuation of politics. Okay, I understand that Ukraine is not entirely holistic, nor is Russia entirely holistic, but we can say that Russia is the fundamental aggressor. They attacked the country. They were the first ones to enter the country illegally. I hope we can have some fundamental agreement. But the thing is that the Trump administration cannot even say that publicly, that Russia invaded Ukraine, or that we cannot use negative terms against Russia, saying that they're aggressor, they're the attackers, the invaders, and all these things for some particular reason. Now, okay, I understand. Maybe my first impression was like, okay, knowing Trump, I've studied and followed Trump for quite some time now, because I wanted to understand his psychology, his tricks, his strategy, and all these things. At first, I thought he was playing some kind of 4D chess, meaning that he starts out very aggressively and then he goes soft on things. I thought, okay, maybe this was just some kind of way to lure Russia into making them feel like they're very comfortable, and then Trump can hit Russia hard in some way, shape, or form. I was like, okay, sure, let him use this rhetoric against Ukraine, let him, love Russia and lick Putin's butt, broadly speaking. Don't want to go too vague on that. I don't want to go too vulgar on that, but you get what I'm saying, basically. But it seems like after how many weeks, 3-4 weeks has been already, where Trump has been pretty negative on Ukraine and pretty positive on Russia. I haven't heard or seen any push or backlash on Russia from him personally, in contrast to what he has been doing with Ukraine. And calling Zelensky a dictator, for example, I mean, there's a thing called martial law, first of all. Martial law is basically when there's a war, you enable martial law. That means that all the politicians, including the president, remain in power unless there's particular voting on a particular politician to remove him from that position or office whatsoever. But when we talk about martial law, we essentially talk about the president remaining in power for as long as war prolongs, and that is the end of that, because you don't want change, you don't want any instability within the regime, essentially. Now, of course, now the opposite argument is that, well, there were countries who held elections during a war, like Vietnam had elections. There were other countries, I think the United States had also elections, things like that. I mean, there are plenty of examples that you can look where warring countries had elections and they held free elections where they went to the front and the soldiers could give their votes and all these things. Okay, I understand that, but I wouldn't necessarily call a president a dictator unless it's really horrific. I mean, you can argue, I mean, me personally, I'm not the biggest fan of Zelensky, but I mean, I feel like there are some grounds and some lines where I think it's like, okay, that's a little bit too much, a little bit too far. Okay, fair enough. Now, what can we conclude from this meeting or this fiasco, let's say, from the White House? This basically signals that it's time for Europe to buckle up. It's time for Europe to finally wake the hell up, not rely on the US anymore, really. And we see that the US's strategy here is to basically cozy up to Russia and then find some kind of peace deal and then say, well, we pursued peace, we are the peacemakers, and here is our Nobel Peace Prize, basically. That's not a way to make peace, essentially. And I just want to ask for all the Americans who support Trump, and believe me, to some, I mean, I don't view Trump as totally, like, there are things that I agree with Trump, there are things I disagree with Trump. I call balls and strikes. I don't basically dismiss entirely people. There are things I agree, there are things I disagree. I think that's the most rational approach to things, to politics, essentially. For example, with immigration policies, yes, I do agree we should have stricter border control and all these things like that. But then there are things I disagree. For example, Trump's stance on Ukraine, totally disagree. I really don't like that approach, and I really thought that Trump would actually be a bit tougher against Russia, and that maybe Russia would actually slow down a little bit, because perhaps they might have feared Trump would do something bad. But it looks like Trump is just enabling Russia to do even more things, to go even further now with the war, and that's not exactly the greatest sign for any of us, especially for Ukraine for that matter. So what can we derive from that? Well, it's time to really become more independent, to try to be self-sustainable, self-sufficient in many ways, shape or form, and basically not be too dependent on the US. That's about it. That's all I can say, really. And it just showed that in some ways I feel like it was done to some degree. I mean, I don't want to get into conspiracy theories and all that. I don't know if that's really conspiracy or not, but I really don't believe that all this just happened by accident, but rather it was perhaps maybe set up in a way that Donald Trump and JD Vance could actually show the public how they would press on Zelensky, because there was a lot of hatred towards Zelensky in the US, especially from the conservative corner. And it's just very ugly in some ways. And I also feel like, honestly, a lot of Americans, a lot of Trump supporters do not understand war. They do not understand, okay, for those people who were in Afghanistan and Iraq and all of that, which is also, honestly, US has a lot of blood on their hands as well. I don't see why they had to go into Iraq, Libya and all these countries as well to unload their democracy and freedom. But okay, that's another story. But I feel like a lot of Americans do not understand the situation and the mentality of Ukraine and the Russians and the overall Eastern European politics, how that works. And if you don't understand that, it's best that you not get into it. It's best that you not mix or put your nose where you do not need to. And it's kind of like, I feel like Trump just views this war as just another average business deal. It's like, okay, you guys have a fight. Look, let's settle this. You have to compromise this. You got to compromise that. Like, I understand the compromise to some extent, but what I don't understand is where he makes it look like it's Ukraine's fault as well to I mean, yeah, war is dirty and war is gray. It's not black and white. I get it, but like nobody talks about what Russia has done for the past 3 years. No one talks about. Well, I mean, people do talk about it, but what I'm getting at is more that Trump didn't mention all the bad things that Russia has done. Why is that? Why haven't I heard anything from the Trump administration where he held Russia accountable? First of all, I mean, Ukraine didn't do another Bucha on Russia. It was Russia who did a Bucha on Ukraine. It was Russia who deported or stole children from those occupied regions. All these things. Where is that accountability? Where is that responsibility? Like none, zero. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. And yeah, I think it's I wouldn't necessarily panic. I wouldn't necessarily start stocking up on canned food and all these things, as I've perhaps heard. It's not the end of the world per se, but I would definitely start keeping a closer eye on the situation, and I would also perhaps try to encourage people to see the situation a little bit more from the perspective of that we've had enough of US's influence on Europe. Essentially Europe has been like a vassal state for the US. And it's basically US and Russia are two different countries, but have a very similar pattern of doing things, invading countries, spilling blood, and all these things. And we just, for some reason there's a particular reason, that we view US as more as the good guys, quote unquote, Russia's the bad guys. And that's it. But I think both of them are bad guys, essentially. But the thing is that US dominates Europe. We have different propaganda. We have different views on the world. US has a strong influence on the Western Europe and Western world, for that matter. And I'm not saying US is entirely bad, but there are a lot of things that US has done that's pretty bad. And for some reason we don't really talk about it, or it's kind of shoved down a little bit. It's kind of put aside. So yeah, I think that's kind of that. So yeah, I don't know, what do you guys think about that? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. As per usual, we'll be happy to debate or to agree or discuss whatsoever. Feel free to share your opinions and thoughts, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Hope you have a good day.